It's Jeff Breedlove in conversation with Esther Panitch, who is a state representative from the metro Atlanta area in Atlanta, Georgia. Representative Panitch, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, and then tell our listeners, this is a nationwide audience, a little bit about where your district is in the metro Atlanta, Georgia area.
So I represent House District 51, which includes parts of Sandy Springs, Roswell, and a little bit of Johns Creek. These are suburbs of metro Atlanta, essentially to the northeast. And I've lived in this district since I moved to Atlanta in 2004, and I love this district. I love representing the people of the state of Georgia. It's one of the highest honors I could ever be bestowed, and I take it very seriously.
Well, thank you. And, you do all kinds of work, of course, in the General Assembly, far beyond work around the addiction epidemic. But you have joined what is called in Georgia the Georgia General Assembly Working Group on Addiction and Recovery. For our listeners and viewers, that's basically a caucus. It's members only. It's House and Senate together. And, of course, it's bipartisan, Democrat and Republican. And there's about 80, 90 members, and that's wonderful. And then there's a handful of them that are, of course, more active than others. And you're very supportive, and you always are engaging. And the very first question I wanted to ask you was, why is it important to you to join this working group, this caucus, and identify with this issue that has stigma around it? A lot of folks might say that's too controversial, but you dove right in, and you're again a leader in our policy discussions and debates. What led you to this?
A couple things. Professionally, I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and I was a public defender for several years. I still take appointed cases as my schedule permits, and I have seen lives ruined from addiction. I've seen people lose their jobs, people lose their families, people lose their homes and their liberty, that they have gone to prison for addiction, which to me is just so horrible because it's something beyond people's control. And so when they're in the throes of addiction, so punishing somebody, it's just an additional burden on them. Now, if they committed a crime of violence or they committed, fraud, there are types of crimes that I have less sympathy for, but for the most part, these are people who were working, who ended up addicted, and it destroyed their entire family and their lives. So I saw the ravages of addiction and wanted to be involved. Personally, my stepfather of blessed memory was a doctor in Miami at the University of Miami who studied professionally addiction and depression. He opened the Mount Sinai Addiction and Depression Treatment Unit in Miami Beach, and he worked with crack babies. He worked in Miami during the crack epidemic, and he was credited as being one of the first to establish an inpatient rehab. So he was one of my heroes, and he passed away. And so to honor his memory, I participate in this space, even though I would have anyway. It's just an extra bonus that it brings me closer to his memory when I can do what I know he loved doing, which was helping.
That's very special. And I've been down to Miami in the recovery capacity and met with the Miami Recovery Project and a few others. They've taken me into communities in Miami, that are experiencing issues from active addiction. And we've been to some cutting edge facilities across Miami, from sort of cutting edge treatment facilities that are very new, all the way down to some a University of Miami sponsored harm reduction. It's not really a building. It's some truck cargo bays put together in a park, but it is now allowed by the city with the support of the university, and Miami's experiencing a lot. but it's certainly a great city trying to address this issue in a special way.
Right.
Um,
And if I may, I
yeah,
attended the University of Miami for college and law school. So I'm very proud of my alma mater and go Canes. But yay. It's also, Miami has always been in the forefront of um, progress in law. And I, I'm 99.9% sure Miami was the first drug court established and by a judge named Steve Leifman. So I also worked in the domestic violence unit, which was a model program for other counties and other states. So Miami is generally at the forefront of how to deal with issues. And certainly Miami was devastated by the cocaine, then the crack
yes.
epidemic down there, not to mention other drugs that flowed freely through the South. So I would typically get a lots of trafficking cases as a public defender. And so I've dealt with drugs for every level and every crime associated with them.
And Miami is, of course, it's a famous city, of course, and everybody's heard of it. And of course, the TV show Miami Vice, which I understand they're making a reboot, which will be interesting to see if it can be as good as the original. But it is. We saw at the RX Summit, which is often in Atlanta, and it will be back in Atlanta in 2027 after a spell in Nashville last year in 2026. But there was a declassified, obviously, video of the Coast Guard stationed in Miami and the work that they do trying to interdict boats coming in. This was in the Biden administration. And, it was just fascinating to see what they would release publicly. And no matter what you think about anything, these young men and young women, mostly young men and young women, serving in the Coast Guard, we always talk about a lot of the other branches of the military, but they are truly on the front lines, doing their very best, following their orders, just trying to keep drugs out of cities like Miami and this country in general. And it was just so impressive to see how they put their lives in harm's way.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah. And they're all deserve our gratitude for doing it because yes, in Miami, clearly we're surrounded by water. It's a peninsula. So you'd have people coming in from Cuba, you'd have people coming in from Colombia, you'd have just people from lots of other places. And because they're so big of a landmass, they could get in pretty easily. So the Coast Guard has a lot of ground to cover, but they are doing as good a job as anybody could under those circumstances.
No, and not to make this a conversation about the Coast Guard in Miami, but it really was like watching something out of a Tom Clancy movie. I
Yeah.
mean, it was just like, this isn't a movie, though. This is
Right.
real life, and it's just what heroes they are, and appreciate them. But let's bring it back to your district, which is, yes, it's in Metro Atlanta, but it could be in Metro Miami, Metro Tampa, Metro Dallas, Metro Chicago. It could be any major metropolitan suburb district. And I'm going to be sort of the old political strategist in me. I'm just going to talk about demographics. I know there's all kinds of diversity in those communities, but they are viewed largely as affluent communities where they're higher end economic communities, which means that a lot of families, no matter what those families look like, where they're from, how they pray or how they love or anything, a lot of those families have the financial means, which means a lot of times the adults and the young children are the ones buying drugs and alcohol, maybe in unhealthy ways. And so that's a perspective, that is interesting in communities of affluence. Yeah, what are you seeing on the ground in your district? You know your district obviously better than anybody. Um, what does the addiction epidemic look like in your communities? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? How is it impacting the communities and the families?
So what I'm hearing, because it's hard to actually physically observe very much of it, because addicts generally don't are not public about their addiction, is generally more legal types of drugs. So opioids, uh, people who can access, yes, I'm sure there are people who are on cocaine or meth, but most of my districts are employed. Most of them have college degrees, and so the overwhelming majority have college degrees, and many have post college degrees. So you're talking about, for the most part, functional addicts, people who can go to work and not it's not obvious that they are addicted. So a lot of it is because they have access to medications, uh, and are overusing the medications. But it's hard to say because it's so underground. Addiction is so underground that until they hit rock bottom, many people don't know, or their spouses are covering for them, or enabling them, or in denial. I also do divorce work. So I see that type of, aside from somebody being charged, I also see spouses come to see me who say, my spouse is an addict, and he or she won't seek treatment, or they've been through treatment and they've relapsed. So I see kind of it from different angles, not just the criminal justice angle, but from people living with someone with addiction who either have tried and failed to stay sober, or don't acknowledge that they are an addict to begin with. So, which is generally much harder, I think, to deal with because they haven't come to that realization themselves that they're addicts and need help.
It astonished me, and I do remind people, and it's not a joke, that when I was really in active addiction, cell phones weren't a thing, really, not really, and smartphones certainly were not in existence, and all these tracking, you know, locational things that people have on phones now that just didn't exist. And you know, I guess I was a functioning person in active addiction until I wasn't. Until I lost my first job, and then had to, you know, my wife learned about it, and my family learned about it, and friends learned about it, and but before that, it just astonished me that I could get away with it for so long. And I used that term on purpose, get away with it, because I knew it wasn't in value with my higher power. But today it just really astonishes me with all the tracking devices and everything, that like people can even be away that long from their loved ones. But if the numbers are getting worse, not better. So clearly, that's not a thing. But what is your message to a community leader in your community as to why it's good policy from a business perspective, a law enforcement perspective, a government perspective, certainly a healthcare perspective, to embrace the reality of addiction and support programs that embrace treatment and recovery, as opposed to maybe just acting like it doesn't exist and we don't want any of these facilities in our city limits or county limits? I mean, do you think it's I do you think it makes a community stronger when they go, okay, we're not immune to this and we need to embrace to serve our constituents, or should a community just act like it doesn't exist?
There is no benefit to acting like it doesn't exist. It's going to come and haunt you. It's going to come out at some point. So embracing it, recognizing that there are people in your district who have challenges with addiction. We've gotten so much better about acknowledging mental health and prioritizing mental health. So there's a lot less stigma than there used to be. If you told somebody you were on medication for depression, 20 years ago, they'd look at you funny. And so that's not a stigma anymore, which is great. It shouldn't be. People, you would take medicine if you had high blood pressure. You should take medicine if you have depression. So, if the medicine is for you, aside, work with your doctor. But it's no different with addiction. In my mind, it's some people have it. That's what happens to some people and to their bodies, and they need help. So ignoring it just pushes the problem further underground, which also causes more extreme behavior. Someone's not willing to come up and admit that they have a problem, or they're less likely to admit they have a problem if there's no resource to help them, or they're not encouraged to get help. Which, of course, if you have somebody who's addicted, they're not getting their, they're not performing at their job at the level they should, and they are not living with their spouse in a more harmonious way. They're not raising their kids. They're more erratic when they're raising their kids, which causes all sorts of problems for the spouse, for the kids long term, for their job. So there's no benefit to being an addict. And people need to embrace it and realize it's not just poor people, not just white people, it's everybody who is subject to addiction. So, it's kind of but for the grace of God go I, but I need to help my neighbor who may be suffering, and his family by extension would be suffering. So, and his business by extension would be suffering. So to help the community as a whole, you have to acknowledge that there are people who have problems and not away from it.
No, I mean, people are astonished when I tell them that when I went to treatment in a metro Atlanta county, not far from your district, that my roommate, I had a Delta pilot roommate and a heart surgeon roommate, and they go, "Really?" And I go, "Yeah." And Coach Cochran, who's the president of AARA, I mean, he has 8 national championship football rings as a Division I coach, and he had to be Narcan or he'd be dead. I mean, the disease doesn't care how successful you are at all.
Correct. And everybody is prone to it. And lawyers also. I mean, we have a higher than general population.
Yeah, risk. I wasn't going to say that, but I was in treatment with several lawyers. It's a whole situation.
Oh, yeah. And so the Georgia bar has actually established a mechanism for lawyers to get help and to be mentored by people who have been through recovery. So it is a phenomenal program from what I hear. They also recognize that there are lawyers who need mental health treatment, and they offer like 6 therapy sessions, I think, a year, because people need help, and they need help quickly. If somebody's ready to admit that they have a problem, you need to help them right then before they lose their nerve or someone talks them out of it because there's some other obligation to meet. So really the resources have to be available immediately when someone's ready to accept it.
No, absolutely. That's such a great point. And, these 30-minute podcasts are great, but they go by fast. And before I lose you, I have time for one more question. And I wanted to say, you're well known for our friends in other states as a leader in the Jewish community in Georgia and Atlanta. And you're very, very vocal on Jewish issues. And you and I have had the privilege of being at events at Chabad's, working with rabbis and other Jewish leaders. But there's still some stigma, a little hesitancy, although it's getting better. That's a fact. But what would you say if somebody's in another state watching this podcast, what would you say to other Jewish leaders, whether they're rabbis, community leaders, business leaders, whatever role they play in the Jewish community, as to why it's so important for the Jewish community in America to work past guilt, shame, and stigma and say it's okay to bring this into our space because we want to save lives? What would you say to a Jewish leader that's a little confused?
So I dealt with this with domestic violence. When I worked for the domestic violence court, I would frequently speak to groups. And but there was a stigma in the Jewish community. Well, Jewish men don't abuse their wives, except that they do sometimes. And so I would give a speech in front of a Jewish group. People were skeptical that the problem even existed. But every single time the program was over, 1 or 2 women would either ask for my information or pull me aside and tell them that they were victims of domestic violence and what could they do to get out of the situation or to help their spouse or, you know, could they leave because they had little kids? I saw it all. So I knew it was in the Jewish community. And as my speeches, you know, as I did more and more speaking, people realized this is also a problem in the Jewish community. So addiction is no different. Jews are like every other person in the world. We have the same issues, physical, mental health issues as the rest of the world. And so there's nothing that makes Jews, quote unquote, special that would prevent addiction from entering our community. So when people realize that we are just as susceptible to being addicts as everybody else, then they will acknowledge and the stigma will be reduced. And I do see that the stigma is being reduced. My own synagogue hosts recovery meetings. And so I don't think it's as big a stigma as it used to, for sure. And of course, if you know a rabbi where it is a stigma, let me know. And I'm happy to go make a call or pay a visit and discuss it with them, because nobody likes to admit that there's people who aren't perfect in their own communities, but that's just reality. People suffer from addiction, and we can either ignore it, which will get us nowhere and harm the community as a whole, or we can deal with it.
No, you're right. And of course, in Atlanta at Chabad in town, Rabbi Schusterman has
Yes.
Jeff's place, which is unfortunately Jeff passed away from this disease, and his family wanted to create a physical space, and they have transformed, not just for the Jewish community, but for the in town Atlanta community around the physical location, with meetings and events and conversations that had just broken a bunch of stigma. So I would say if you're listening in another state, Chabad in town, they're on social media, and you can Google them and look at Jeff's place. And we need to make sure that recovery is in every space. And some of us who love the Jewish community, love Israel, I want to make sure that everybody knows that they're welcome in the recovery space, and that people in the recovery space want to make sure we're reaching out to and being inclusive. So you've always been a bridge builder in that area, and I want Jewish leaders in other states to know that they're not alone.
Correct. They're not alone. There's lots of company. So come on in and take the issue head on and be a leader in your own community to show people who are suffering and the families who love them that there's a way out.
And my last question, and it's got to be a semi lightning round, not a lightning bolt, but kind of fast question. But it is, I think, important as an elected official, a member of a state general assembly, for me to ask you this. Why do you think it's so important that my community, when we come to you, to elected officials, that we conduct ourselves in a bipartisan manner? What would be your message to my community as to why it is essential that we are, resolutely bipartisan?
So, just as addiction doesn't discriminate between religions or races or ethnicities, it also doesn't, or social status in terms of wealth, it also doesn't discriminate among Democrats or Republicans. You have people of both parties who face addiction issues. So, it should be an all of government approach, which includes both parties. So there are some things I believe that rise above politics. This is one of them. Healthcare is one of them. And addiction is also a healthcare issue. So it needs to be addressed. No different than if we were dealing with cancer or breaking your arm. I mean, there are healthcare issues. People need it. Or it's any other chronic disease, frankly. Obviously, breaking your arm is not a chronic disease, but a chronic disease needs help and continued support. It shouldn't matter who you are, what political party you belong to. And I'm grateful that in Georgia, we have a strong bipartisan and bicameral group that works together collaboratively to get the best results for the people of the state of Georgia.
Well, thank you. Representative Esther Panitch, you are a recovery champion, and we appreciate your leadership. Where can folks find you on social media?
On Twitter, or X, I am at ePanitch, EPANITCH. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, Esther for Georgia, ESTHER, spelled out. And then I think that's where I am. I'm on as well, but I'm not really good at some of those other social media apps. So I have someone generally who helps me, but if you want to go see some debate, go to my X page.
Well, thank you for your leadership. And, we always tell people that recovery is real.